Imagine waking up one morning to find that Canada, your biggest neighbor, has decided to cut off your electricity and oil. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what Canadian leaders have warned could happen. With U.S. states relying on Canada for 95% of their power, this bold move could leave millions in the dark. So, what does this mean for you and the future of North American trade? Stick around to find out how this shocking twist could change everything. Recently, Canada made a big move that could have serious consequences for the U.S. Specifically, Canadian leaders have warned that they might reduce or even suspend their electricity exports to some key U.S. states. These states, including New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, rely on Canada for almost all of their electricity needs, about 95%. If Canada follows through with this threat, it could cause a lot of problems for these states. Why does this matter? Well, these states are highly dependent on Canadian electricity. Without it, they could face rising energy bills and even power outages, especially during peak demand times. Imagine dealing with huge electricity bills or even blackouts right when you need power the most, during hot summer months or cold winter nights. The threat is real, and it's not something to take lightly. But here's the twist. This isn't just about power cuts. It's a strategic move by Canada. The country has been growing frustrated with U.S. trade policies, particularly the tariffs that have been imposed on Canadian goods. By threatening to cut off electricity, Canada is using its energy exports as a bargaining chip. It's like saying, if you keep doing this, we'll hit you where it hurts. It's a direct response to the U.S. tariffs and an attempt to make the U.S. rethink its protectionist stance. This move could have far-reaching consequences. If Canada decides to go through with it, it could create a ripple effect that goes beyond just energy prices. It could change the way the U.S. looks at its trade agreements with Canada. Energy is a vital part of any economy, and if this becomes a regular tactic, it could lead to a complete reassessment of trade relations between the two countries. At the same time, this raises important questions about energy security. Canada's threat shows just how intertwined the energy markets of the U.S. and Canada really are. It's not just about electricity, it's about a larger economic strategy. The U.S. might have to rethink its reliance on Canadian energy if tensions continue to rise. And this is only the beginning of what could turn into a much larger issue between the two nations. The U.S. and Canada have a crucial relationship when it comes to oil. Every day, the U.S. imports about 6.1 million barrels of oil, and nearly 67% of that comes from Canada. This means Canada is a major supplier to the U.S., and without this steady flow of oil, the American energy system would be in big trouble. The U.S. relies on a network of pipelines like Keystone XL and Enbridge to bring that oil across the border. These pipelines are the backbone of the U.S. oil supply, moving millions of barrels every day. Without them, the U.S. would face serious challenges to meet its energy needs, leading to higher costs and supply shortages. That's how critical Canada's oil is to the U.S. economy. Now, imagine if something disrupted this oil supply, even for just a short time. A disruption could send oil prices through the roof. This might not only affect the price of gasoline, but also lead to higher fuel costs for industries, from shipping companies to factories. It could also impact the cost of everything that depends on oil, like transportation and manufacturing. This oil dependence also plays a huge role in the ongoing trade tensions between the U.S. and Canada. With tariffs and trade restrictions escalating, Canada's oil exports are being seen as a bargaining chip in these talks. Canada could use its oil exports to pressure the U.S., and even a small disruption could have big consequences for both economies. And the trade? The trade war between the U.S. and Canada has been escalating over the past few years. Tensions have risen as the U.S. imposed hefty tariffs on Canadian goods like steel, aluminum, and other consumer products. These tariffs were part of former President Trump's America First policies, which aimed to boost domestic production but also caused friction with key trading partners like Canada. In response, Canada has been striking back with its own countermeasures. Among these are threats to cut or limit exports of vital resources to the U.S., including oil, electricity, and rare earth metals. These are things that the U.S. relies on heavily, whether it's Canadian crude oil for fueling the country or electricity that powers several U.S. states. The idea is to use these exports as a bargaining chip to push back against U.S. tariffs and make the U.S. rethink its trade strategy. This back and forth is starting to take a toll. As tariffs rise, prices for a lot of goods go up. Manufacturers in the U.S. are facing higher costs, and industries like automotive manufacturing are feeling the strain. If Canadian oil or electricity exports were to be reduced, costs could rise even more, affecting everything from gas prices to everyday products. So, is this trade war really worth it? Are these protectionist policies sustainable in the long run? It's a tough question. While they might seem like a way to protect domestic industries, they're also putting a strain on both economies. The future of these policies is uncertain, and the impacts are still unfolding. Building on the trade tensions, the U.S. and Canada's economies are deeply intertwined. The U.S. relies on Canada for key resources like crude oil, natural gas, and minerals such as cobalt, nickel, and lithium. These materials are essential for industries like automotive and aerospace. Canadian crude fuels U.S. vehicles, while minerals support everything from batteries to electronics. In 2024, U.S.-Canada trade reached billions of dollars, underlining the importance of these exports. However, this dependency creates vulnerabilities. Any disruption, whether from tariffs or political conflicts, could send shockwaves through the supply chain. Even a minor issue can lead to higher costs, delays, and rising prices for consumers. This interconnected system is fragile, and political tensions could undermine both economies, making it harder to stay competitive. As tensions continue, everyday consumers are starting to feel the effects of trade disruptions. The ripple effect from tariff skirmishes and energy export cuts hits industries and, eventually, consumers. For industries that rely on Canadian energy, like automotive manufacturing and freight, costs are rising. Companies that use Canadian crude oil or electricity could face higher prices for fuel or power, which can increase production costs. These rising costs are passed down to consumers. Energy bills can go up, gas prices might rise, and the prices of products can increase as well. If Canadian energy exports are cut or restricted, these costs could rise even more. For households, this means paying more for things like gas, electricity, and even groceries. On a larger scale, these disruptions can contribute to inflation, which slows the economy. As the cost of living increases, consumers feel the pinch in their wallets. The balance between protecting domestic industries and maintaining affordable goods and services is delicate, and trade disruptions only make that balance harder to maintain. This situation is becoming a global chess match. Canada is using its position as a key energy and raw material supplier to leverage influence. By controlling vital resources like oil and electricity, Canada has a powerful tool to pressure the U.S. into reconsidering its protectionist policies. With energy needs continuing to rise, the U.S. might have no choice but to reassess how it deals with Canada and its energy exports. If Canada decides to reduce or cut its energy exports, it could severely impact the U.S. energy grid. These cuts would challenge the U.S.'s energy security and force policymakers to rethink long-term strategies for energy independence. It could also accelerate changes in energy policies as the U.S. faces the reality of needing Canadian resources more than ever. Meanwhile, other countries, especially Mexico, are watching closely. As these tensions reshape North American trade relations, third-party nations are observing the power dynamics shift. The global balance of power is being tested, and everyone, from governments to industries, is closely monitoring how the US and Canada navigate this crisis. As we've seen, trade disruptions and energy export cuts can cause price spikes that affect everything from your gas bill to the cost of goods. It's all connected. Problems in one sector can cause problems in others. Policymakers are trying to balance job protection with the realities of a global economy, but the risk of rising prices and inflation is high. These decisions today will shape the future of trade and economic stability. What do you think about these trade tensions? How will they impact you and your wallet? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates.